Then when we translate it into cinema, which is into the movement or moving images, then comes the role of a cinematographer. And we all know that Aparna Sen has worked extensively with one of the greatest cinematographers that Indian cinema has ever produced, which is Ashok Mehta. And therefore, I think I should start with a question as well, which is a question that I am just doing it, but we can discuss about it later on. Is it is said, I have read in several places that when Ashok Mehta was having a brief with Aparna Sen for 36 Chaurangi Lane, then he asked for a brief about the visual, the visual compositions and the color schemes and everything about the film that she wanted to do. And she said, and this is what I've read, I think you will confirm, that she said, and this is what I read, is I want the film, I want it to look like a rose that has been pressed on a book, and it has lost its color and not its fragrance. And that was the brief that started off the brilliant color scheme that we see in monotones and in 36 Chaurangi Lane. So I think I would love to know that what brief she gave for Paroma. The second thing that I wanted to also start with is another person. When I'm talking about the idea of portrait and how it has been translated from photography to cinematography in the body of the film itself, as well as in the narrative where the photographer is one of the primary or central character. There is another thing that comes to mind is the mezzoscene, or in very physical material terms, the set direction, which plays a vital role in creating those portraits of Paroma and her relationship with the rest of the characters in that narrative world. And where we should also talk about Ashok Bose, I think, who is the art director for the film, and we also know him to do the art direction for Hirok Raja Deshe and other films. So the kind of art direction or the kind of mezzoscene that was being built by the director, the cinematographer, and the art director also created that world that we see in Paroma, and from where all these readings about Paroma or all those appreciations about Paroma comes from, I think. So I think this is perhaps very few occasion when a film scholar gets the chance to ask the filmmaker about how this mezzoscene was created with the collaboration with these great artists. Before I go into into that idea of a series of portraits that I'm talking about, we started the discussion when Aparna Sen was already there, and she asked us about where did you get the films. So we said that we saw it in YouTube. And I actually saw 3 films of Paroma in YouTube. The first one is Paroma in Bengali. The second was Paroma in Hindi. And the third, Paroma in subtitles. Now, why am I saying this? Is because the brilliant screenplay and the dialogues and the subtlety of those dialogues when people are talking to each other is something that changes for me, because I'm privileged to know Bangla and Hindi, and then we have a habit of muting the dialogues and see the film silently, but the subtitles used to pop up because I was also looking at cinematography for this talk. So I saw the film, 3 different versions of the film. And why am I saying this? Is because when, say, for example, in the Bengali version, in the opening sequence itself, Paroma was established in the domestic space with different roles that she plays as Kakima, Mamima, mother, and wife, and all those things. And that beautifully sets up how Paroma is perceived in that domestic space. Now, when there was a scene where someone was explaining a lady who doesn't understand why the same person has been called with different names. And then it was explained in the Bangla version, but when we go to the Hindi version, certain things could be translated, but Kakima, Mamima conversation could not be translated. So it was kept as it is. And then if I go to the next part, say 30, 40 minutes into the film, and we see that sequence when Rahul and Paroma are going to Poroma's mother's Poroma's house, where his mother lives with, where her mother lives with a son. And it was said that the house was in North Calcutta. Now, this is very important because this is important in the sense because throughout the film, there is practically dialogues and scenes that are being created where there is a clear north-south, two different worlds of Calcutta that has been talked about time and again in different places, like say a flat in Elgin Road, but a body or a house in North Calcutta. Now, when in the Bangla version, we see they are saying that Rahul is saying, okay, the North Kolkata house with Boro Dalan. Now, Dalan is a word that we generally use in Bengali cases, is a house that was built in North Kolkata by the Bengali upper class, which is a pakka house, a house that is, a house that is not like those houses that we see in the villages. And those people have the money and the resources to build big mansions. Now, when we see the Hindi version, we hear Anganwala house. Now, Angan is not a direct translation of Dalan. Dalan has a completely different connotations than Anganwala ghar. And in the same scene, if you go a little further, you'll find that there is, now this is typical Bengali nuance, which was, which I think something that is missed in the Hindi version, where the mother of Paroma says that those of you who understands Bangla would know that Derkhana Ghor. If I read the entire dialogue, it says that Tau ei derkhana ghore nijeri kulaina, that means that it's a 1.5 room. Now, this actually means that when the North Kolkata house, which was said in the scene itself, is when the house has been divided among that big family, and everyone what they get is one room and some space which is part of the larger common space. So you get 1.5 space. Now that is a very poetic historical reference that can be written in Bangla. But when we see the Hindi version, we find der or do kamre. Now, those are not the same thing. Now, so when I was watching the Bengali version and the Hindi version, time and again, it seems that when I'm going through the dialogues, which are very nuanced, very subtle, very detailed, I'm practically watching two different films. And then when you go to the subtitle version, which is farther away from the Ganges and Hooghly, you see a completely different film. But we are used to watching a lot of films in subtitles, so we can leave it at that. There is another thing that I wanted to put further so that it might initiate a discussion or might help or might want people to look at the film from a different point of view is if we read the film as those narratives which are not being said in the film. Like one which comes to mind is if it would have happened today, then probably ma'am would have made sequels after sequels of it, because there was one instances where she said that she was talking about the vagabond life that they were dreaming. So that was a story that was not told, but that was a story that was there. There is another thing that we can say, that the photographer character Rahul is a photojournalist, a street photographer, a photographer who does feature for Life magazine. So practically, what if we look at Life magazine's evolution from say 1930s to the 1970s, which is the golden period, and probably that was the Life magazine that is referred to, then we see a series of changes in the photography of Life magazine, from war photography, which was referred to when Rahul was being shown, was showing photographs of Beirut and other places for war photography. And then comes the photo feature where he was photographing the middle class Indian women, and that came out as that photo feature, which practically opened the Pandora's box, which is called "Risking Violence is Never Easy." That was the feature that came out, where all those photographs were there. And so when we look at that photograph or those things, it is practically a film that, if you see the history or evolution of Life magazine for that matter, you can practically read a parallel narrative of Life magazine if I follow Paroma and the journey of the photographer and the photographs or the portraits that features in the film. But this is where again another question that I have is the second photograph, the pivotal photograph, the photograph where we see Paroma, and we see remember question mark, and then Rahul, and that that photograph, if that thing that has been written there, is it written by the photographer in the photograph first and then taken a photograph, or was it written in that glass with the hands in when someone was bathing or something? And then when we see that scene, that there were we see that the husband, or which was played by Deepankar Dev, he was watching at the feature and saw the first photograph, the first portrait that was there of Paroma in red sari, and the Durga Puja scene that happened in the opening sequence. And then he was flipping on the pages. Then there was some ad that came in, and then came that photograph. It still eluded me that how the name featured, because the portrait means nothing to someone who doesn't know the character. To them, it is just a portrait. And then those words creates one set of meaning for a general viewer. Now, when that Life magazine, which is a common magazine or general magazine for an American audience, but not so common magazine because when Life magazine comes to India, it's an elite magazine for the Indian middle class, but it is not so in America. So in that case, when it comes here and the person knows the person in the photograph, it creates the kind of meaning that propels the film into the direction where we see after the photograph was revealed. So the photograph with that writing, and blame, I don't know, the YouTube has messed up with everything. So I could not uh, understand, because it doesn't go with my logic, that how come that photograph and the writing comes together. So that is another question that I have for you now. So these are the places where I want to put the my where understanding or reading Paroma can go, I think, apart from the brilliant, rich study that has been done on Paroma till now. Now, let me come to the to my main point, or to the main point that I wanted to talk about, and that is, I consider Paroma as a series of portraits, and why I consider it as a series of portraits, because when we talk about portraits in photography, then there are, and for people who are doing photography as photojournalism, or doing photography as fashion, or doing photography as street photography, various names come to our mind. Either the photographer knows the character, or the photographer doesn't know the character, or the person that he's photographing. If that person doesn't, if the photographer doesn't know, then there are certain ways in which the photographs are taken by the photographer. There are several ways of doing it, and the camera's choice and that sort of thing. And when the person gets to know the character, then the photography, the framing comes in a different way. Now, when we see throughout the narrative, there are several cameras that are being used. Like the camera that comes to my mind, the first sequence, the first scene where Rahul has come to take photographs of Paroma, who was talking to a person to give the laundry and so on. And we see, say, a Mamiya camera, Mamiya 67, I think, which is a medium format camera meant mainly for larger prints, great color productions for fashion and that sort of thing. And when we see the photograph that features as a first photograph, we see a Nikon, probably a 35 millimeter, which I cannot see from there because I got the camera in the digital era, so I only have academic knowledge about it. So it was that camera is, when we see that camera with that spot metering through which we see the characters and so on. So all these cameras are creating Paroma. First, when that photograph comes in, that was the first punctuation mark, I think, when Paroma gets to know Rahul and they go to that Kalighat sequence where he takes street photographs, where we see photographs that have been taken of Paroma, and then she goes into the North Calcutta home and we take the portraits. The nature of the portraits is changing as it keeps on taking photographs, but the photographs then do not feature anymore because now the cinematography has taken over. Now we see the photographer in action, and so the cinematographer has to reproduce those portraits for where the photographer in action as well as the person who is being photographed has to be framed and has to be composed. And there we find the brilliance of Ashok Mehta and you of how Paroma has been framed as she goes from one phase of her life to the next phase, and we see how she has been framed within framed, and the beautiful color scheme. Like we have two basic color scheme that even YouTube could not destroy. One is, and I wish I could have seen your original celluloid. One is that monotone where you have generally uh, almost a brown and yellow monochrome with red accents. And then there are several, majority of the films has the classic complementary color scheme of green and red. Um, and the red, and then there are apart from the dream sequence and some night scenes where there are blue, use of blue and use of red filter. Apart from that, we see this color scheme of red and green, dyadic color scheme, or red with almost monochromatic background throughout the film, with streaks of lights, which creates different layers of the scene. So it is really something that we today try to do it in Photoshop, which has become very, very easy nowadays. But it is, I can't even imagine how that could have been done then. I mean, that is something that I am still awestruck. And so we see those color scheme evolving, and we also see that when she comes back, and I should mention here about another great that walked in this film, which is Bhaskar Chandravarkar, and we have known him as a scholar as well as a great musician, music director, etc., for several films like Khayal Gatha, for that matter. And when if my year of classical music is good enough, then probably that sargam that she was humming is Malhar, I think. And that was used twice. And when we talk about that, when the cinematographer takes over with that portrait mode, or the portrait theme that I read the film, I see those framing changing as Paroma's life changes. Now, it is very hard to show the inner workings of the mind, because you have to show everything in cinema. And when you hold the camera on the face, after a point of time, you have to devise a way to do it. And that I cannot explain how, but what I can explain is, or what I think I can explain is the textures and the contrast that has changed with different sections of Paroma's life. Like I can remember a scene where Paroma was shot from from outside of some sort of a mosquito net, and there was a blue light on it. And then when I see her talking, getting the sitar and the light that was coming from outside with some lightning and everything, and we see again the contrast changes. But when we see them talking in general parlance in the Elgin Road flat and in North Kolkata homes, we see a completely different light scheme. Now, what I wanted to carry on with this idea with the last 2 points that I wanted to make. The first is that if I have to talk about what the film is all about in a line, then I do not have to do it, because it's incredibly hard to do, because the director who was playing a character in the film itself has done it for us, I think. So I would read that line, and I think that line sums up the story itself. So the line goes from the subtitle. I'm reading the subtitle here. Sheila, played by Aparna Sen herself, says that, look, personally, I feel no person is another person's personal possession. The framing is something, it is probably 1 hour into the film, and I would ask people to remember the framing, because that is a cinephile exercise that we have forgotten. So the framing is very important here. And then a slight reframing of Sheila, and then the subtitle runs like this. But perhaps it's better to consider, if you are harming somebody in the process, back to the first framing, when the more important point is how valuable this relationship is to you. I think that sums up the central, theme of the narrative. But what I wanted to, and that comes, and it's very interesting because it comes from the director who was playing a character and she's a legendary actor as well. So that is something that comes. But what I wanted to put into perspective here is how the framing was done. Now, Sheila was framed frontally, and she was almost looking at the audience, but not at all looking at the audience, slightly off center, which is, if I know a little bit of my camera, which is an impossible task to do. And then slight reframing when she was looking to Paroma, coming back to that frame again, where she's almost looking at the audience, slightly off center, and she speaks those lines. And this framing is not, if I remember the film, is not repeated anywhere in the film, but the last sequence, which is an incredible sequence. Again, that is the third question that I have for the director. How did you devise that incredible last sequence? Because in the last sequence, by which I'll stop talking, is when Paroma was in that in the hospital. She was told that she needs some kind of a psychotherapy, and then the whole family member, or the whole family comes and meet her, and then she was talking to them, and she says that no, and that brilliant line, very simple dialogue, but one of the most poignant dialogues, I think, where she said, no, I am not feeling any guilt. And that was very powerful. Now, if we look at the entire scene, it begins with a classic establishing shot of all the family members sitting in straight lines, which is something that in Paroma never it was done. It was done in a very classical way. In most of the film, they're sitting in a straight line, in an establishing shot, and then we come into single shot, two shot close-ups, and with inserts of extreme close-ups of the characters. And when the husband talking and the doctor is talking, these are the two persons who are talking. The camera pans from one person, from the doctor to the husband. It doesn't cut to them. It pans to them as if Paroma is seeing them and looking at them talking, but she could not see them in such extreme close-ups at best, logically. However, we see that there are no traditional eye line match, but they are moving their head, and the camera almost choreographs with their movement in a combination of medium shots, close shots, extreme close-ups, and coming back to Paroma every time, one almost like a dance. One cycle completes Paroma, one cycle completes doctor. So beautifully choreographed, but it was not choreographed as by the editor. It was choreographed with the camera. I mean, and all those shots, if we put them in cinematographic terms, are medium shots, close shots, extreme close-ups of 2 shots or 1 shots. And then finally, as she delivers that line, we come close to Paroma and the camera zooms in. It was tracking or dollying. It was zooming a little bit at some point of time, but now it zooms into extreme close-up of a tired eyes. And then we go to that almost like a rosebud of Citizen Kane, of that plant with burnt red leaves. I mean, in the Bengali version is beautiful, where it says, it says that it looks like a rock. It is a kind of a darkish red, which looks like a rock. That is a very bad translation of the Bengali dialogue that was there. And there the film ends. So what I want to finish by this is the choreograph of those faces as they are conversing with Paroma in the final sequence is, I think, the crescendo of these series of very intricate portraits of Paroma as she walks through the mise-en-scène that created the narrative. And I personally think that when I look at Paroma after again, for the last 2-3 days, I was fascinated by how these intricate choreography of movements of Paroma happens with that portrait in mind, or that portrait photography and cinematography in mind. That is where I want to stop. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rajdeep. Really unique insights, and personally for me, you have really opened up the film in ways that I had not thought of. Thank you very much. And Aparna Sen, would you like to respond to Rajdeep first, or would you like to listen to more responses of those in the meeting and then answer everybody? How would you like to go about it?
I think I'd like to respond
Sure.
to Rajdeep, because
Sure.
already
Okay.
I've lost track of questions. So if I
Okay.
hear it more, then I will not be able to remember.
Sure. Okay. Please go.
Started with the briefing of Ashok Mehta, right? That's
Yes.
why I made little notes.
Should I repeat it for you once
No,
more?
no, you don't have to. I remember. Briefing Ashok Mehta, because I took notes actually. So Ashok had said to me, if you were to describe your film in one line, how would you describe it? So I said, Ashok, how can I describe, the look of the film in one line? So I said, how can I describe it in one line? He said, try. What is the most important thing about it? So I said, I think that it would look, it would have a lot of pastel shades. No dark, no bright shades. But I put it like this. I said it would look like a rose that has been pressed for a very long time within the pages of a book. It's lost most of its color. I didn't use the word fragrance that somebody must have put in, but it's just the pale pastel shades of the rose that remain. And we tried to make the film look like that, choosing the curtains accordingly and everything. In fact, we went, Bansi Chandragupta was, we wanted to use chintz, which is very sort of, very used much in Anglo-Indian homes. But Bansi Chandragupta had chosen something rather strong, but I quietly told Ashok Bose that I didn't want it. I wanted something pale, and I saw something, like dusty pink kind of thing. And we chose those curtains. And we more or less stuck to those colors without really having anybody do a color palette. It was a long time ago, and we didn't do as much, how to say, in terms of creating a color palette, etc. But it was because, since it was there in my mind's eye, every time I was asked to approve something or choose something, I automatically went into that color palette. That's the briefing part. Then you were talking about the Hindi, Bangla, and the subtitle versions. I have to tell you that in those days, we didn't do the subtitling ourselves. It was all done by NFDC. So whatever, whatever sort of departures are there from the original Bengali dialogue must be NFDC's, because we used to send the stuff to them, but it wasn't always done according to our wishes. And you said something about Angan versus Dalan. We actually had a long talk about it. I didn't care too much for the Hindi dialogue that was written. But anyway, we did find, though, that in Bengal, when we say Angina, we mean something small. When they say Angan in Hindi, it can mean any size. That's what we found out, because even the big houses and mansions, they have Angans. And the small cottages also have little Angans. So it's, but the central courtyard, which we call Dalan. Dalan is actually not just a courtyard. Dalan is all the buildings around it and everything.
Yes, and the pillars and
yes.
And the whole thing.
There is no Hindi word for Dalan as such. But Angan is in the sense of a courtyard around which the house is built. Well, that's about what they could get in Hindi. I was worried about the Kakima and Mamima. But what I was told is that Hindi is spoken across India in different ways. We think that in Hindi they say chacha and chachi only, but that is apparently not true. They also say kaka. They also say, mama, mami, mami. They don't say mamima, they say mami. But kaka and kaki, that kind of thing. Depending on whether it's in Bihar or, wherever. Different states in India speak Hindi differently. They adapt it to their own, language. Der Khana Ghar and Der Do Kamre is more or less, I think, the same thing, because Der Khana Ghar is not literally 1.5 rooms. In Bengali, even when we say to Der Khana Ghar ni thaka or something like nijideri jaiga kuloy na, which means that we have a small space. That's basically what it means. And so Der Do Kamre, ye Der Do Kamre, which to me is actually a good translation. Now, Paroma's, I remember you talking about Paroma's photograph and how did the writing come on that? Very simple. The way I had thought is that Rahul bought a magazine and wrote with a felt pen on it and then posted it to her. That's all.
So it was a personal touch.
It was a personal touch, remember, and then love or something like that.
It was that simple. I was thinking of so many things.
That's the trouble with academics.
Guilty as charged.
Guilty as charged. Okay, now Rahul's camera you were talking about, we did those the markings later on. At that time you had to actually draw it. You didn't get those formats that you can use now so easily. So it was drawn, and through which we are seeing Paroma. But interesting comment on the portraiture from you, because it is that also, even though perhaps it was not intended as such, but it's very much that, because it is Paroma's portrait, and Paroma being seen through other eyes than that of her family.
Right.
Not only other eyes, the camera lends a certain perspective.
That is what I found fascinating. And the lights had been drawn. You were practically, what was seeing it was also part of your seeing at some point of time. I mean, when the photographer is bringing in lights and and other things.
Yeah. He's bringing in the lights and this and that. Also, I wanted it to be a little funny at that point because Paroma is taken completely by surprise. She's talking to the dhobi and she's trying to explain to the dhobi that he shouldn't send it to, to be washed in such a way that all the color runs and is faded, etc. So in the middle of all this, and she's not even dressed properly, suddenly this guy comes in and he starts behaving as if the house is his. So I wanted a bit of humor there as well. And I think we got that because people always laugh when the dhobi starts counting. Tumi abar ha kore ki dekhcho? Gono. She says, what are you staring at? Count. So he starts counting the clothes. And that invariably, usually, invariably drew laughter from the audience. So that was something that I had wanted anyway. Color schemes, I don't know how intentionally I did it, but because I was so tuned into the film, to the character, it happens that, you tend to choose the right things. I don't think that I went around.
But may I say something? I mean,
Yes.
You literally defined Bengali interior home after your films. I mean, if you look at my room, it still has got all the shades that you use in your films. I mean, I don't know, but you literally defined Bengali interior decorations with your films, and it's still going on.
And I have to tell you that I got in an interior decorator because even though Ashok Bose was very good, he was used to doing sets. We hardly shot on in the studio, very little. Most of it was actually shot in Elgin Road house, in Elgin Road block of flats.
Oh, that'd be even harder.
No, it's not. It's actually easier.
Okay.
I find it easier. It's always much more realistic if you do it, if you can do it on location. I mean, I like shooting on location. What is outside the window, for instance? Most of the time in studio, you'll do burnouts. So
yes.
Yeah. Or
but you lose a little bit of control, isn't it?
No, you know what happens is that because of the constraints that are there, you are forced to innovate. So it is a smaller space than you would, for instance, get in a studio. But then you use lenses accordingly,
That's another thing that I wanted to ask you, please. I'm asking you a lot of questions.
Just a minute. Let me just finish this part.
Yes, please.
Now, the choreography you talked about, nursing home sequence, the whole thing in the nursing home sequence was that these relatives who used to sort of occupy a prominent place in Paroma's life and with whom she thought she had one-to-one relationships. It turns out that she didn't actually. The other relationships with her in-laws were all based on the primary relationship of her relationship with the husband. That was a primary relationship. All the others were secondary relationships, which grew out of the marriage. But she had thought that she had, for instance, with her mother-in-law, she had thought that it was a one-to-one relationship. But she finds that it's not that way at all. The mother-in-law, when she's ill and Paroma comes into the room, she asks her daughter, she says to her daughter, okay, jete bolo, ask her to go away. So Paroma realizes and she leaves. And when, in fact, the doctor comes to see the mother-in-law, I think we have that is something that was very carefully choreographed. We have shots of Paroma in her room and she's pacing about. She's almost like an animal in a cage because, the shutters of the room, the khorkhori, what we call in Bengali khorkhori, the shutters, they are sort of partially open and through that the light comes in. The room is in darkness. So the whole room is striped like a cage.
Yes, beautiful. That was beautiful.
So that was done deliberately and carefully. But some of the other things were also done deliberately and carefully. For instance, Rahul projecting slides of the photographs that he'd taken during the puja on the wall. So Paroma is there on the wall, huge. Paroma. And then Paroma leaving comes and somebody calls her and she stops in front of the image. So there's Paroma in front in real life and Paroma on the wall as an image. Those things were deliberate, of course. In the nursing home, I wanted Paroma to, for the first time, look at her relatives as individuals with their own vulnerabilities. So each one, when you see Paroma's face and then you see their face, and Paroma is looking at them, obviously, and they are unnerved by this new confident woman. Confident, but not aggressive, because if you are truly confident, you don't need aggression. So she's there and she's looking at each one, and somebody is, I think her sister-in-law is biting her lip, and all of them are kind of slightly puzzled. And Paroma is watching all that. She's seeing each person as an individual for the first time, not as a married relative, not as an in-law only. So her sister-in-law, for instance, she just sees as the woman, not as the sister-in-law.
Yes, I mean, bracketed. I mean, that was genius.
Yeah. So that was there. And then when finally the doctor, when suddenly Paroma realizes that the doctor, before Paroma says, the doctor is saying, don't you want your space back, apna nije jayega, and apna ghar, apna sajano sangsar, your home, your such a beautifully decorated household. And then we go into Paroma's eyes, through Paroma's eyes, and then after that this was done deliberately. We used 9 mm lens, very, very wide, fisheye.
Oh, okay. It's almost fisheye. Yes.
Yes. So we used that, and I asked Ashok if he could, as we tracked into the room, if Ashok could keep bleaching out the color, in the camera itself. So he said, yes, I can do that. And so he was letting in, actually just changing the exposure and opening it up so that more and more light was coming in. Gradually, everything was turning almost white. So you come into the room, and then there are photographs, frames with no photographs in them. And so as if this entire beautifully Shajano Sangsar, carefully maintained household, all that is like so shallow. It's like a hoax. It's like not even the frames are empty, so photograph frames are also empty. So that was again very deliberately done. That part was deliberately done. Yes. Yeah, I think I've answered all the questions.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Aparna. I'll like to open out the discussion, and maybe I would like to begin with a question to you, and that is about your interest in mental illness. In this film, we have the character of Shudha Pishi, who really reminded me of Bertha Mason, the character in Jane Eyre.
I've been told this before also.
Yeah, the mad woman in the attic figure. And Paroma herself, is in need of psychiatric treatment towards the end of the film.
At least they say so. Her husband and the doctor say so. She doesn't think so.
Yes. And of course, you take up the question of schizophrenia in more detail in your other film, 15 Park Avenue.
Yeah.
So I was just wondering, like why and how mental illness becomes an important theme for you, and especially when you combine it with adultery. I mean, not adultery, that's a bad word to use, but when you combine it with a theme like this about women's desire, and does it necessarily have to end for the woman as madness. Or, in the case of an earlier Bengali film, the Uttam Kumar film, Stree, in that Mrinmoyi dies. So, are death and madness the only, ways in which woman's desire, or the expression of a woman expressing desire, does she have to necessarily end in this manner?
Okay, I don't think she has to, but a lot of the time, society, that's what they did to these women. In Hindi version, there is also a small scene which I didn't keep in the Bengali because it was getting so long, but it's there in the Hindi version, where there's a mad woman who runs out into the street, and Paroma is returning from Sheila's house in a taxi, and she watches this mad woman, and suddenly she remembers Shudha Pishi in the attic. In fact, Joshadhara Bagchi, who used to teach cinema, I think, in Jadavpur University, she said to me that this is the mad woman in the attic. And strangely, I read Jane Eyre later. I hadn't read Jane Eyre then. So I said, but I haven't read. I know I've heard of this, but I haven't read this. She said, you don't have to read it. It's like racial memory. So perhaps it was that. But the truth is that we had an aunt who was not shut up. I don't think she was a mental case or anything else. She was not shut up, but she always stayed up in her room in the terrace and never came down. Later, I heard that she had an affair. I mean, she was not married. She had an affair and she had conceived a child. And my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, had gone with her to some place where the child had been delivered and put up for adoption. And then she was brought back. She was a Masi, Tulu Mashi, we used to call her. And she lived always in the terrace. She never came down. But I wasn't scared of her or anything like that. Or she never asked us to open the chain of the door. She never asked, and she was not chained. I mean, she was not shut up behind a chain door at all. But you know how it is, you draw upon your own resources that you have experienced, you draw upon them, and then you fictionalize them, and then you keep adding things. And it was good that I could use the chain on the door, because in a sense, Paroma is in chains. So when she has that dream, Shudha Pishi is saying, Shikolta khule dibi, will you just unlock me? And then she says, Kintu ami hat paai na ji, but I can't reach it, she says. I can't reach the chain. Which is true. At that time, she hasn't acquired the ability to unlock herself, which she does at the end of the film. So my interest in mental illness also stems from the fact that I have a very close relative who has chronic schizophrenia. So it is 15 Park Avenue was almost a tribute to her. And then, also her mother, who was this girl's mother, the relative, her mother, she, the kind of trials that she went through just to handle her daughter, all that I put into the sister in 15 Park Avenue. And also I used this thing also in Paromita Ragdin, which is another film of mine. Which the English is House of Memories, I think, which is a different title. But then I went, just a little more.
Sorry.
Yes. It's okay. I went to, while working on Paromita Ragdin, this House of Memories, I went to the Sudha Kaul's Institute of Cerebral Palsy. And there I met many young people, many people who were challenged mentally, physically. So that has, that is a abiding interest of mine, in the sense that I'm very sympathetic, and I've tried to use in many of my films some challenged person, because I have felt one thing, that we are so used to the quote unquote normal that we forget that these people are also a part of our citizenry. And it is because we don't see them that we think of them as abnormal. But if we were to see them in films, what do we see in films? Mainstream films, always it's Hindu, white and male. That is the common thing. But Even women now were marginalized for the longest time, marginalized in the roles of sacrificing mother, devoted wife, and so on and so forth. So when you put that person you say that person has a mental illness and you lock her up, that's what society used to do. It is not something that I want, of course. Not at all. I'm totally
Sure.
against it.
Yes. I think Swarnavel has something to say. Swarnavel?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
Uh, Thank you. Thank you, ma'am. Wonderful watching your film and also, getting your own insights. It was extremely interesting. For me, that you chose, Paroma, of all your works, that itself means a lot. I think it
I
also
didn't choose
speaks
it.
to, you did not
I-
choose, sorry about it. Maybe it
Today,
was.
today I didn't choose it. It was chosen and I was asked.
Okay. So it is actually, that it also talks to your own take on, feminism, as you also concisely put it. It's about, being confident or self-assured without aggression. So I think it's a very important film in your aura. And also, many of the points, which I had, regarding the aesthetics or the technique, Rajdeep Roy also spoke about it in detail. But I would, like to say that personally how I look at it. That is, you see, when, long time back when we were young, we watched 27 Down. Then Rocky left this very strong impression on us, But then we were waiting, for some kind of, those kind of that she will straddle, the mainstream as well as that kind of film, being in Bombay. I don't know, in Bengali she might have done. But so this was a remarkable film. So when we saw that, that we were very moved, that in Bombay, I remember after Chowringhee Lane, Paroma got released in Bombay in, I think New Excelsior or New Empire, I forgot now, but it was within, the cities of Bombay. So I remember, the print was so extraordinary. Unfortunately, when I see on YouTube, that it is more towards the
I
brighter.
want to die.
Ah, so on the screen, it was wonderful because, that
That's photography.
one thing is about Rocky's performance, which I think, I realized, I thought only a woman director can do this, that, at that point of time. Because in Hindi film, she was doing after, 27 Down, a lot of films. But one could see, that in mainstream film, are discomfort, within the film itself. That you see, we always talk about the male gaze, but we don't discuss, how does the female gaze, how does the gaze is returned, when there is one woman standing and then around her there are 50 men, so here I think, that this was wonderful for us to see that gradually how she gets into the role and how she becomes really, that, that the great actors, that we always, thought she is. And so this is, a great film for that matter alone for me, the history of Indian cinema. And the other thing, about is Ashok Mehta's, camera work. One thing which always struck to me that, whereas from, FTI and other schools, I myself, alumnus from FTI. We had, camera people who were extraordinarily good, like K.K. Mahajan Saab, that with contrast and other thing. But Ashok Mehta, as if he took, Subrato Das, this bounce lighting, but also he celebrated, this, faces without any harsh kind of shadows, down the nose, and the highlights, like somebody like Robert Richardson. So when I saw it on the screen,
One of the things that Ashok used to do that I loved were
Hmm.
the balance between shadow and burnouts.
Yes.
Fantastic, yeah.
Yes, and it's this film is also, when I saw it on the screen, is one of his a classic example of masterly cinematography. I think Rajdeep Roy went into greater details. I would not like to repeat that. Then the other thing about this is that the ending of the film, that it was also a response for me from great director to what was actually going on in parallel cinema at that moment. That, for example, the iconic moment when a child threw the stone in Ankur, which was repeated variations on the same theme in many films. So that also made me ponder, even as I was watching it yesterday for this discussion. I wanted to refresh my memory. So I saw that the film holds very well. It does not age it at all, and the ending is remarkable because that it is about life with which you are ending. It is not about anger, even though it is
She
highly
remembers the name of the plant. She
yes,
remembers the name of the plant.
yes,
It is like finding herself, actually,
yes.
almost as if she has discovered her own identity.
Identity, and also that composition with her own daughter, and and they are in profile, and that yes, and she has that she has now understood her mom, that kind of a thing is
Yes,
there
she has. That's what I
yes,
intended. Yeah.
yes, and the flower in between,
Yeah.
the ways. So it was a remarkable ending, that so in many ways, that it's a remarkable film, not only in the context of that period I'm talking about when we watched all these films, but also seeing it after so many decades, and it holds very well. So that is what I mainly wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Swarnavil. Would you like to respond, Aparna Sen, or shall we take more comments, questions?
Yeah, I think that there was not really any question.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Yes, Nikhila, please go ahead.
Thank you, Rajdeep, for opening out the film to us, and thanks, Aparna ma'am, for responding to all those fanboy questions of Rajdeep in some way. I think we're all big fans. In fact, when the film was announced, many people promised to join us just so that they would be able to listen to you, ma'am. I had two responses to the film. One is I just wanted to say that it so happens that in the last few weeks we have watched Astitva with again Tabu in a masterful kind of performance, and last week we watched Anna Karenina, and this week we have watched Paroma. So it's an interesting kind of three films that talk about transgression in the marital relationship and the different kinds of consequences that women who enter into such transgressive relationships have had to face. So it's very interesting also in terms of the performance. Professor Ajanta is here and she was impressing upon us how remarkable Tabu's performance is in Astitva, and we all watched how wonderful Rakhi is in this film. The second point I wanted to make is, with regard to a text that this particular film reminded me of. This is a short story by A.K. Ramanujan called Annaya's Anthropology. It's a story in Kannada, but the English translation is also available. This is about a young man who goes to an American university and who's fascinated by all the knowledge that is generated, the ethnographic knowledge that is generated by American sociologists about Indian society, Indian caste system, Indian family, and so on. And then it ends with a certain kind of shocking revelation that the young man has when he opens one of the sociology books and he sees that the clean-shaven widow in the photograph there is actually a picture of his mother. So this kind of ethnographic, turning turning Paroma into a kind of ethnographic figure through the Life magazine for consumption in the West. I was also thinking about that dimension. Initially, there is a lot of discussion within the family about whether it's okay, for her to be photographed. And although she is the last person whom somehow whose permission is sought, but in any case, she permits it, and she does, become part of this. But the consequences of becoming what is called a typical Indian housewife, I was just thinking about that, what does it mean to be represented to the world outside as this typical, whatever that means, the typical Indian housewife? Because by the end of the film, as you have rightly shown through the kind of transformation that she undergoes, she's hardly typical, right? So there's something that...
In fact, she didn't. In fact, what is interesting is that you pointed it out, that her permission actually is never sought, because her husband says, "Oh, your Kakima, yes, wo razi hai." Without without even asking her, he says wo razi hai. And Paroma is kind of coerced into actually being photographed. She doesn't want to be photographed at all. But you're right that there is a transformation of she was the typical housewife initially. She was really known by the social roles that she played: somebody's aunt, somebody's daughter, somebody's daughter-in-law, somebody's wife, somebody's mother, etc., etc. So she was weighed down by those social roles, so that the person inside, the individual inside, had got lost. And that individual is rediscovered just the way she remembers the name of the plant. That becomes a metaphor for herself, actually.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking about, how we turn certain subjects into ethnographic subjects, calling her a typical Indian housewife for a different kind of an audience. That was just the point that I was trying to make. Thank you, ma'am, very much. Thank you. Yeah.
There is a long comment by Professor Jyotirmoy Prodhani in the chat box. Jyotirmoy, would you like to speak yourself, or should I read this out?
I can read also, Geeta. I'm not sure about but before that, of course, I would like to say hello to Madam Aparna there, because there's a big moment for me. For the first time in my life, I'm speaking to such a great star that is there. And in fact, since I'm from Assam, I teach in Shillong, and of course, I watched so many of your films, so I know you very well, of course, through magazines and cinema. So that is there. And I was telling Geeta that this is going to be a big night for me with Aparna Sen. Then about Paroma, in fact, though I had watched some of your earlier films, of course, last being perhaps Mr. and Mrs. Iyer,
yes,
which you had directed. That is a brilliant film. In fact, that had made tremendous impact upon me. And after a long time, I was telling my friends and everybody that after a long time, I really saw a film of this level, which could make such an impact. About this particular film, Paroma, when I was watching this film, in fact, today only on YouTube, the Bengali version with subtitle, then I was thinking, how do you look at Paroma? Because of course, when it comes to Bengali cinema, we have come across many similar characters like Charulata and also like the Bimola in Baide. How do you think Paroma is different or from these iconic characters of Bengali cinema and literature, of course? That is one. Secondly, I was thinking about when it comes to the depiction of sexuality in the context of Paroma, that I found to be a kind of an engagement which provides her a sense of agency as well as some kind of an emancipation. That is for Paroma. That is how I looked at. and also a means to emancipate herself from the moral world of patriarchy. This is his one. And but when it there's another act, another figure is involved is of course Rahul. How should we look at Rahul's involvement in Paroma? Was it Rahul was involved because he wanted to provide that agency to Paroma, or was he just tried to seduce or took advantage of her situations? Rahul being a kind of metropolitan guy, and he knew the vulnerabilities of women. That is one way.
I shouldn't have to tell any member of the audience what Rahul intended. The film should do that. I mean, whatever you get from the film, whatever you deduce, is right. Because after I've made the film, it's no longer just my film. It's open to interpretation entirely. So if you ask me what I think, then I'll tell you that Rahul had known many women in his life and loved many women in his life. Paroma was one woman that he had also loved, but he knew her constraints. He knew that there was no future as such. Socially, there was no future for them. I don't even think he wanted a future. Rahul was not the kind of person to bind himself to anything, any one thing. He was a free spirit. So I don't think I would judge Rahul harshly. I don't think he tried to seduce her. He was interested in her, interested in her mind, interested in her angles and all that. He was deeply interested in what kind of poetry she read, for instance. But nobody else was. Nobody else was interested in what Paroma thought, or what Paroma liked, what Paroma disliked. Paroma herself says, now how does it matter to anybody what I like or dislike? She says that herself on the bridge when Rahul and she are on the bridge. Whereas Rahul kind of opens her up, almost like a flower opening up, from a bud into a flower. So Rahul in this film is more than anything a catalyst for Paroma to find her own identity.
But there's another thing I was thinking. One particular blunt moment I came across when actually that particular magazine comes, where Rahul, that particular photograph of Paroma in her bare shoulder, and that scribble, remember, and that kind of thing. It's almost like exposing Paroma's secret world onto the world, as if that is where there's a breach of trust happened.
I don't think Rahul thought of it like that. A woman photographed with wet hair and bare shoulder to an international photographer like Rahul is not a big deal. He didn't think of it like that. And the fact that he sent it was because Paroma, as Paroma says herself, that I myself had asked him to send letters at our address, because nobody obviously opens letters, other people's letters in their family. But since this was not a letter, since it was a packet with a magazine, Bhaskar opened it. Maybe he wouldn't have opened it if it was a letter. So, the whole thing is very full of nuances and full of misunderstandings, so to speak.
Absolutely.
Because Rahul, I don't think Rahul intended to expose Paroma. He took that photograph. Later on, he wrote with felt pen, remember. That's a different thing. But he took that photograph. For him, taking a photograph of a beautiful woman with her shoulder bare, I don't think he put any other meaning to it,
But was it not that because he is basically dealing with his subject is an Indian housewife, sometimes
the Indian housewives can have
social thing.
Yeah, Indian housewives can have many facets to them, including being wet and having a bare shoulder. So I don't think when Rahul said Indian housewife, he wanted.
I was thinking, did he make her position a little more vulnerable? That's what I was thinking.
No, but not intentionally. He did, of course he did, but not intentionally. When a photographer says that I'm going to shoot Indian housewives, then that entire work process is a voyage of discovery.
Yeah.
It's not as though he has decided that this is what an Indian housewife should look like, and therefore I'm going to photograph her like that. When he says, he finds out what there are many kinds of Indian housewives, for one thing, not one kind, So I don't think for Rahul it was a betrayal. No, it did. You're right that it made Poroma's position very, very vulnerable, but it was not intentional. It was perhaps a little thoughtless. Maybe if he had thought it through, then he wouldn't have done it. But maybe he didn't think that, oh, nobody's going to open it. Paroma said herself that you can send me letters in my name to my house. Nobody opens any letters here. So he sent it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
We, we have a question that has been posted on Facebook. We have viewers who are watching it. So the question is from Rajdeep Roy. If the film had been made today with all the discussion around mental health and women's rights, would Miss Sen have made the film any differently?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the whole scenario of women changed after Paroma. I mean, Paroma actually had a very catalytic effect on women's minds. You know, they kind of opened up. I'm not saying Paroma is the reason for that, but there was a flux. Paroma was part of that flux. And, women reacted very strongly to Paroma, because I remember during the premiere, after it was over, all the women, people had left. I was waiting to go out at the end. Then 3 little old ladies came up to me. They looked this side and that side. They came and whispered to me, bless you, ma. Beche thako ma, she said. And they said, actually. Because their lives, obviously, I realized, had been lives of deprivation. So they kind of responded to Paroma, because somewhere there was a grain of truth that people responded to, with anger or with opposition or favorably, but it didn't leave them, oh, okay, I've seen a film. That didn't happen. So after Paroma, there was a change, and now there is such a change. I mean, look, Paroma, in Paroma, the fact that she was an adulterous woman was treated in a certain way, but after the adultery was never shown in films before that. Charulata, yes, but Charulata, not explicit adultery, but I have to also say that Charulata was marvelous in the fact that she was completely unapologetic. She was not guilty. She was not apologetic. She was attracted to her brother-in-law, and she saw that in herself, and she was okay with it. She was quite comfortable with the fact that she was attracted to her brother-in-law. But Charulata was a very, one of a kind woman. She was not the usual kind of woman, even though she was born in that time so long ago. I mean, fictionally, of course. But she had a modern kind of a mind. She wrote, she could discuss things. I think today, even the soap operas, soaps that are shown, the daily soaps, they have adultery all the time. So what is so new about adultery now that I would make a film like that today? I wouldn't make it. Rajdeep Roy, to you, I say that I would not make a film like Paroma today. Paroma had its own time.
Professor Ajanta Sarkar has a question. Ajanta, please go ahead.
Evening. Nikhila and Geeta, thanks. And ma'am, for me too, it's such a fan moment and really a very, very big evening. So, and I want to trace back in the lineage that Nikhila was talking about. So when we discussed Taboo as well, and that's a 2000 film. Taboo too, and I'm sure you know, it always, what strikes me, ma'am, is that there has to be a young, sensitive guy who comes along and spots something. So, and it's
Actually,
always
I haven't seen Astitwa, so it's a little difficult for me to understand.
Right. Ma'am, so she's similarly a very talented woman, and her husband is quite oblivious to the talent. And it's I'm forgetting the name now, Malhar Kamath. It's Monish Bahal, the very good-looking Monish Bahal, and they have a passion for classical music. Similarly in Charulata, similarly in Paroma. So I'm struck by that continuity. And because you're such a great, one of the greats of Indian cinema. So for the last month, as Nikhila, we actually began this discussion after coincidentally after the sighted sound poem came out. And for the first time, Professor Iswaran is here, Swarnavel is here now, is Chantal Ackerman being voted one of the great films of all times. So the question I want to ask you is this: if cinema, and cinema clearly is such a major part, stories are such a major part of the way histories are written. So then how in all of these films, at the end, it becomes one woman or one man who is in some ways different from the other. So when we want to invoke questions that are greater than one individual of class, and I'm greatly indebted to Laura Mulvey and all of the film theorists that we read, how then, and there's nobody better, in my view, who can perhaps respond to that question. Certainly, I will not meet anybody so famous and so knowledgeable. How then do we think of stories that can tell us not about exceptional women or men? Do we have modes of storytelling? What conceptual vocabularies can we use? I loved Arshinogor, and I think for me that's my favorite film. We discussed that also when we were discussing Ek Duje Ke Liye last week. So your oeuvre has been so astoundingly diverse. So that's the question I have about form. But because in the end, otherwise they become exceptional women. And what about common women like me, who are not like like Charulata or whoever?
I don't know if you're common. Since I don't know you, I'm sure you're not common if you are joining a discussion like this and then asking questions and commenting. I am sure you're not common, as you very modestly call yourself. But the thing is that whenever even if you take a common housewife, Paroma was a common housewife. She was good looking, but she was basically a housewife who was playing out her social roles as aunt, mother, daughter-in-law, wife, etc., etc. Every human being, however common, has something exceptional inside them if you look deep enough. So when you take a look at a common housewife and you explore her journey, then she becomes exceptional. She wasn't exceptional to start with.
Sure. But do we only need sensitive young men to make that journey possible?
Not necessarily, but it can be that way because, physical attraction or love or sex or whatever, that is underplayed as a factor in determining our lives.
Yeah. Alokik Srivastav, you may go ahead, please. Alokik, are you there?
Yes. Am I audible?
Yes, you are. Please go
Yeah.
ahead.
It's such a privilege to be here and asking questions from Aparna ma'am. So I just had two observations in relation to the movie, and I think this is my thought process when I see the character Paroma. There was almost animalistic existence of the female lead that was there in the movie, and I think it was a part of her being human at the end of the movie, wherein she was defined by several roles, Bahu, Beti, और फिर कहीं ना कहीं इस चीज से पूरा आगे उभरते हुए she discovered herself as to what she really was. These are all social roles that was given to her that never defined her as an individual.
Quite right.
Now, what is interesting is the role of the other in the discovery of the self, and that role starts with even with the husband of Paroma. So he allows Paroma to be photographed, and that is how the story progresses. Subsequently, Rahul, the second other, Rahul helped her realize as to what her true what she really wants to do in her life. And third is obviously the best friend portrayed by you yourself.
Yeah.
Very beautiful line that I think summarizes the whole movie. That you are not in possession or ownership of anyone else. You are really free until and unless you just have to. There's only one cardinal rule: you must not harm the other in the process. I think that's a very, very beautiful line. So I think I just wanted to ask that in this discovery of self, what do you think is always the role? So do you really need an other in self discovery at any point of time?
You need something. Either you need a person or you need a life-changing event or you have to go through a life-changing illness. For Paroma also, you know, the suicide that she attempted, that gave her a lot of insights later on, and the nursing home gave her a lot of insights, because Rahul had come, she had had an affair with Rahul, and Rahul had gone away, and she was grieving. Up to that point of time, she was just a woman in love, nothing else. So it's not Rahul who changed her. Yes, he acted as a catalyst in unlocking, you know, in breaking down the family taboos.
Yeah.
That way he acted as a catalyst. But after Rahul goes away, when Paroma attempts suicide and she injures the occipital area of the brain, and all her hair is cut off, and she looks like the archetypal adulteress. In fact, that was done very deliberately. In fact, I'll tell you, that image came to me long before the storyline came. That image of the archetypal adulteress. And I think Girish Kasaravalli's film, what was the name?
Ghata
Shraddha had a lot to do with it, because I was most impressed by Ghata Shraddha. And the adulteress image, I think, must have, I mean, that the inspiration must have come from there. But anyway, what I'm saying is that at the end, Paroma lying in bed and writing that you know, they come looking for looking for their mother or their aunt or their wife or whatever, and that she's lying there, and there's this nurse who just arranges red flowers in a phuldani se lal phul sajaye, guldaste mein she arranges red flowers. All of this, first of all, that sequence came to me from Sylvia Plath's poem.
Okay.
Of tulips. The tulips, they devour my oxygen. That's a beautiful poem by Sylvia Plath. I think that worked as an inspiration for this, the red flowers. All of this seems so meaningless. The fact that, you know, they're saying that the doctor is saying that she needs psychotherapy, whereas for the first time, she's actually becoming free. They're saying she needs psychotherapy so that she can go back to what she was, that not free person.
Yeah.
So, no, all this happens to Paroma because of a life-changing situation, the almost losing her life, going to the doors of death, and then looking at herself fresh. You know,
All right.
it can be a person, it can be an incident, it can be, as I said, a disease, it can be anything, but you need a catalyst in order to start thinking differently.
Correct. Or else it would have been gone the same way as it was going.
Yeah, otherwise, you know, if she hadn't attempted suicide and all that, then she would have just been a woman in love who separated from her lover. That's all.
Yeah, Tarkeshwar has raised his hand for a while now. Tarkeshwar, please go ahead.
No, this is not a question as such. I just wanted to join the debate. That was quite interesting. In order to bring out the quote unquote the self or the sexuality of a woman, is the trope of a young man is necessary. Because the films that we have watched has used this trope. I'm calling it as a trope because there's the one way the filmmakers have tried to bring out the sexuality of a woman to the fore. But the character played by Aparna Sen Madam itself is quite interesting. Our attitude towards the sexuality and extramarital relationship, when she consults her, she doesn't say anything. It's up to you. You take a call on it. But when she's in trouble, she stands with her.
Yeah.
And she has only belief in her. So in that sense, where did this character come from? What was the catalyst in this character's life? Is a question that I think
Sheila's life.
Answer
Sheila's
that.
life.
Yeah.
See, yeah, quite right. That we can explore, but the film was not about Sheila. So, you know, each character who comes into the film, we can't show their backstory because then the film would become at least 36 hours long. You can't do that. Sheila, we have shown, in any case, Sheila to be an exceptional woman even before we see Sheila. Because the daughter says that, you know, she has this school for I think she runs a spastic school. And then she didn't join her husband when her husband went away because she wanted to look after the school. How many women would do that? So to start with, you have established that Sheila is an exceptional woman, isn't it?
Shubhankar Bhattacharya, please go ahead.
Hello,
Shubhankar.
Rinati. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Can you
please
hear
go
me?
ahead.
Yeah. So you've already talked about Ghata Shraddha, so I'll keep it to two questions. You'd said that when you were thinking about casting after you'd written your script, you thought of Nutan. Was it because you wanted to break away from that image that that was sort of writ large in the films of that time that she had done, like Sujata and Bandini, that you thought of Nutan? So I'll allow.
No, it was also because a friend of mine in Bombay, a close friend, she suggested, she said, why don't you see Nutan? And of course, I thought of Nutan as a very beautiful and sensitive woman. And particularly my friend Sartaj, she said that Nutan has a very sensitive face. You know, somebody. So I went to see Nutan. I talked to her, but after I saw her and talked to her, I don't think she came across to me as a typical Bengali housewife.
That was one. You talked about Ghata Shraddha and how that image, the shorn head of the adulteress, came to you possibly from that film. So I had a sort of larger question about form and structure in your films. I was struck by an interview you did with Gautam Ghosh, which was many years ago. This was
Yes,
before you were doing Mr. and Mrs. Iyer. It's one of my favorite sort of interviews because he delves at, it's always a different take when a filmmaker is talking to another filmmaker, and then you collaborated on Mr. and Mrs. Iyer shortly after that, I think. So you'd said that you love to get to the point in all your films where the protagonist, male or female, is absolutely alone. And I think 36 and Paroma are sort of redolent examples of that. And I see a sort of not resolution, because that seems to suggest that we've seen it all, but in The Rapist as well, you needn't talk about The Rapist because it hasn't theatrically released. I see that arc as well, where her character, Konkona's character, is also absolutely alone at one point, where even the husband, not exactly, he doesn't repudiate her, but she feels like the problems which were not of her making have put her in a sort of a bind.
Yeah, she finds, yeah. Let's not talk about The Rapist because,
No. Yeah, you don't want to talk about. Yes, if you can,
it
if
will
you can.
be released soon. So it probably
Yeah.
will be released in April.
Robin Anjumna told me that he just re-edited it for the theatrical screenings. I just met him. So Robin Anjan Moitro, your editor. Yeah.
Oh, for the censor board.
For the censor board, yes. So, no, if you can talk about 36 Chorangi Lane and Paroma and any later films that you want to, where structurally I noticed this, because I've thought long and deep about your films, as you know, and I noticed this recurring sort of narratorial impulse to get to that point where all those layers are stripped away and the protagonist is absolutely alone.
Yeah, I tend to do that. Loneliness is something that attracts me, I think. That and old age. Old age is also something that old people have always had my compassion, because I felt that they had nothing to look forward to except death, and what an existence that is. So basically, I think I have been quite a kind of champion of the marginalized. It's not deliberately done. I think that's just the way I am. I mean, I like to take look deep into my characters and peel away the layers. In Paromita Ekdin, for instance, my character, Shonuka, she becomes completely lonely at the end, absolutely alone. And
except for that daughter of hers, Kuku,
Except
who
daughter.
ultimately is administering the medicines to her mother, because not administering medicines to her mother, she's going with the medicines and letting the mother sort of give her the medication and then putting her head on it. It's such a poignant scene.
Kuku also is marginalized because she also is schizophrenic. So so she's already marginalized because of her mental condition. And Shaunuka is absolutely alone. She didn't have a happy life with her husband. She had formed a close bond with her daughter-in-law, but the daughter-in-law gets divorced and leaves. And then she becomes more and more and more and more alone.
There's
And
a
also-
comment. There's a comment. There's a comment in the chat box from Jayanto Dasgupta. He says, it just occurred to me in relation to Geeta's question that in her book titled Historia, Elaine Showalter categorically establishes a connection between sexual repression and hysteria. Also, there is a word dalan in Hindi Urdu. It's bigger than Angan and is associated with the houses of feudal lords.
Dalan.
Dalan.
Okay, then whoever did my Hindi translation didn't know. Yeah.
And if you could also briefly talk about 15 Park Avenue, Rinadi, because I believe we don't talk enough about that film, which is so powerful.
But this is not the time to talk about it. We've been talking for nigh 2 hours. This is not the time to talk about 15 Park Avenue. That we'll leave that for another discussion.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. There's another question coming in from Facebook by Preeta Chakraborty. Can we say that Rahul is the representative of a new economy, a new world order built of individuals who act as a catalyst in the discovery of Poroma's individuality as she transformed from a member of a social to an individual? What I'm trying to ask, that when we say Paroma is a product of her time, a time of flux, is that also an economic flux, a change in India in relation to the world?
Well, a lot of women were already, particularly from middle class and lower middle class households after the Second World War, like we saw in Shrutajit Ray's film Mahanagar. They were forced to work, and many families who didn't have a lot of income did need double income, needed both husband and wife to work. This happened particularly after the Second World War, but nothing happens overnight. It happens slowly. It happens in stages. And I think in Paroma's time, people from wives from well-to-do households, upper class, well-to-do, upper middle class households, they didn't always work, except sometimes they were teachers or, something like that, something very sort of, many of them were teachers. Mostly they were teachers, but, or professors, sometimes, some rare cases, doctors. But most of the time, if they didn't need to earn extra money, women were stay-at-home moms. And Paroma was also one like that. So I think that society sort of kept changing. Before Paroma, after Paroma, society is always in a state of flux.
Swarnavel has another point to make. Swarnavel, please go ahead.
Yeah, this again is, more of observation. I want to add on, to what Ajanta, Jyotirmay, and Alokik were talking about, and also, ma'am, you responded by saying, the catalyst element. So here, I would look at, that how cinematically it is through spaces, it comes. That is, he is, traveling all over the world. Even in the end, we realize, Greece and US is not there, perhaps somewhere else. But for her, despite being, this middle class housewife, we see her only from that flat to this flat, unless and until, that she is pulled out, and we see her on the streets. So through space, it speaks to that, it's about how, it could even be like in a Clay Dennis film, it could be just the body of a man physically attracted, a woman is, and that leads to, so it could be that, it need not necessarily be a privileged kind of art form, so there are many ways. So here, I think that spatial element comes out very beautifully because, the spontaneous shots, as you mentioned, initially she's shocked that, you could take photographs in unusual, unfamiliar situation. But then, he is on the street, she is there, and there's a nice shot when in the foreground, that she blushes, Rakhi on the street. So what it does, when they are, able to come out of this socially constructed division, like, a domestic sphere is only for women, and public sphere is only for men. So that this film does beautifully, I think, wonderfully.
Thank you.
There's another question in the chat box. You mentioned your interest in schizophrenia, and photographs, portraits are recurring themes in your films. I was thinking, could they be related?
I have had photographers in my films. In Juganto, there was a husband used to take photographs. Here, Rahul takes photographs. These are the two main photographers. I think Shubhankar will be able to tell me if there are any more. I don't think there are
Mr. and Mrs. Iyer, Rahul Bose.
Rahul Bose, yeah. Right, right. So I don't know why I have photographers. I've been asked this question before. I think one day rather flippantly I said, because I find them sexy. So but that is jokes apart. I mean, why do I have photographers? I think because a lot of the time I'm trying to show another point of view. The camera gives you a distinct point of view. In Juganto, the husband keeps zooming in and zooming out, and the wife coming closer and going further away. And that is actually the nature of their relationship. They keep going away from each other. So sometimes I have used the camera as a device.
Yes, please go ahead.
May I add a little bit to my question? The
Yes,
point
please.
I was trying to head at was when you mentioned schizophrenia, and schizophrenia itself is a intense visual experience. That's a state of altered consciousness, and that's also when moments become intense at the expense of the narrative. The relationship between moments become feeble, but the intensity of the victim, the feeling becomes like enlarged. That is somehow a photograph. I mean, I think that's close to photographic experience as opposed to a narrative. And you talk about your interest in mental illness, and we see this themes of portraiture, characters who are photographers, photographs, freeze frames, montage sequence. So I was thinking if you see any relationship between these two tendencies.
You know something, a lot of this, it comes from a subconscious level. So I can't really answer these questions. Maybe somebody who can, the critics or analysts may analyze why I did what I did. I can't always analyze, because a lot of the time I'm dipping into my subconscious. And that is the magic of the creative process, that you don't really want to analyze too much. Why you get an idea sometimes is quite magical. You just get the idea.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for that. Any more questions, comments? Yes, Sanjay, please go ahead.
Yeah, I was thinking about this scene where you have all the people, members of the family sitting, and almost the last sequence. And there is camera focusing on the doctor, and he's like indicating something to the husband, and then husband, so it like husband has to say something, and finally he says that, well, you should undergo psychotherapy. So it's like almost the doctor is, and the husband is complicit with the doctor. So I was thinking like about these two figures, the dominant figures who are exercising authority, and at the same time thinking of Virginia Woolf. In one of her letters, she wrote that a doctor is worse than a husband. So, so what happened that she was herself undergoing psychotherapy, and that was her experience. She had already been so much dominated and oppressed by her husband, and then she had another bitter experience with the doctor. So finally she wrote this letter and found that the doctor is equally the same kind of authoritarian figure in her life as the husband was. Yeah, so it's interesting that the camera focuses one after another from the doctor to the husband, and both of them are suggesting that she should go and undergo psychotherapy. And what is the result of, like, why she should go to the psychotherapy? Because the doctor is saying that you should come back to the home, you like to come back to the stereotype role
to what you were, whereas she just got freed.
Yes, so there should be no evolution, that you come back to your earlier position. The status quo should be restored. That's the main concern of the doctor,
exactly,
as the concern of the husband.
Yeah.
No,
This patriarchal mindset is very difficult to get rid of. You're not even always aware that you have it. That's the trouble, because you're so much part of it that you're not even aware.
Yes. And the second point was about the word dalan, because I'm also Hindi speaking, and we use the word dalan. In fact, in my village.
Thank you very much, because I didn't know, and obviously the person who did the Hindi dialogue didn't know or didn't think of it.
This word is used actually in the village. I have heard it, and I have myself used it. And it is also used in some of the short stories of Premchand. And there is a very famous like proverb, like Mahato ji ka dalan nahi hai ki muh utha ke chala hai. Like, anybody can come anytime. Because there is this story about Mahato ji in whose dalan anybody can come anytime. So that reminded me of that. Anyway, thank you very much for this wonderful film.
Thank you. I learned something new.
Okay.
I have a request for Inadi. Can we please do a session with on 36 Charangi Lane with you, like this, delving in extenso into the film, please? Thank you.
Yeah, maybe. Let Geeta decide.
Yeah, we'll think about that, Shubhankar. Thank you. That's a film that has already been discussed. So
maybe after The Rapist is released and after everyone has seen it, we can discuss The Rapist.
Yeah, that's a better idea.
36 has been discussed to death.
True, and we have also discussed it on this forum. And we don't repeat films. Yeah, in fact, Shubhankar, you yourself led the discussion for that, right? Yeah, so it's quite late in the day now, and we are extremely grateful to Aparna Sen for accepting our invitation and for responding to all the questions and the comments in great detail. It's been such a wonderful experience having you here on Talking Films Online. And this will definitely be marked as one of our best meetings.
Oh, Geeta, thank you so much.
Yeah, definitely. And for those of you who have come to the meeting for the first time, I would like to say that we have a Facebook group. We also have a WhatsApp group. So I'm putting down my number on in the chat box, and you could text me, and I could add you to the group so that you keep in touch with us and continue to patronize our Talking Films Online, which is our.
Geeta, may I just make a small intervention? So sorry to interrupt.
Please, Ajanta. Yeah.
I'm so happy to see so many of my VIT colleagues here. Professor Satyajit Ghosh, Jacopo Masoso, Muntu, who's a fine arts. So I wish there was a forum that we could, publicize this more widely. My own students, so all of us love TFO at VIT, and to have Aparna ma'am here has been really a great privilege. And I will, if you don't mind, I will myself, also give them your numbers, because I think many more would like to join. Is that all right?
Certainly, absolutely. Please, please, it would be great if you could spread the word, because we are all passionate about cinema, and we would love it if more of you become a part of it. Yeah. So thank you all very much. Good night and have a nice
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks to
Thank you.
Rajdeep. Thanks to
Thank you, Rajdeep.
Rajdeep.
Yes, thank you, Rajdeep. Thank you so much for initiating the discussion in such an insightful manner. Thank you so much, Raj.
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you.
See you next week.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Good night.
Bye.
Good night.